His mouth was warm and unfamiliar, but I didn't pull away. The kiss wasn't planned. It wasn't tender either, just sudden, sharp, almost uncertain.
My back pressed against the fridge.
My breath caught somewhere between surprise and something I couldn't name. It lasted maybe 4 seconds, 5, long enough to register, short enough to pretend it hadn't happened. I opened my eyes, and his were already on mine. We didn't speak. He stepped back, and I turned away. The sound of the coffee machine sputtering in the background reminded me, this was still my kitchen, still my house, and I was still someone's wife. 12 hours earlier, none of this had happened. 12 hours earlier, I was chopping parsley. It had been 3 years since he last stepped inside our home. 3 years since he'd been just a tall, lanky teenager helping carry boxes upstairs. Now he was something else, broader in the shoulders, quieter in the voice, eyes darker, more observant, like he had learned how to notice things, and chose carefully when to show it. The message came around noon, a photo of the highway through a windshield, with a caption that shouldn't have meant anything, almost home.
Miss your coffee.
But it did mean something, not because of the words, but because of how they settled in me, like a memory brushing against something I hadn't touched in years. I reread it while standing barefoot in the hallway, feeling the cold floor beneath my arches. My husband was outside fixing the shed door again.
You heard the soft clunk of tools, the occasional grain, the sound of a man doing something practical, steady, safe.
Inside, everything was in its place. The rooms I'd arranged over the years, the plants I watered religiously, the photos that hadn't moved since we got married, all perfectly in order. Except me. That day I didn't wear perfume. I told myself it was because I'd be in the kitchen most of the afternoon, but truthfully, I didn't want to smell like anything familiar. Instead, I slipped into a dress I hadn't worn in years, soft beige cotton, the kind that fits just right if you stand still long enough.
Un dernier hâte, you wore something simple. Black.
Not chosen for anyone else, just to remind myself how it used to feel. I told myself I was just being thoughtful, that I always dressed decently when guests came. But he wasn't a guest, and I knew it. He arrived around 5. No fanfare, just a knock, a casual push of the door, and suddenly there he was, taller than I remembered, a little scruff on his face, the same smile but heavier now.
A man's version of the one he knew.
He hugged me.
Not too long, not too tight, juste neuf.
You haven't changed, he said, setting down his bags. You have, I said, before I could stop myself. He didn't answer, just smiled again, differently this time. The evening was uneventful, if you ask anyone else. Wine, small talk, my husband telling stories he'd told before. But I was watching, not constantly, just intentionally. When I leaned down to pull the roast from the oven, I felt his gaze. When I set the plates, his hand brushed mine, twice, never by mistake. Later, after dinner, my husband went to the garage for a screwdriver he forgot. I stood by the counter, finishing my glass. He came up behind me, silent. Still the best cook I know, he said. I turned. He was close, closer than necessary. Thanks, I said, but my voice sounded off. Too dry, too light. And then it happened. The kiss. 4 seconds. 5.
No hunger.
No softness. Just clarity. Like opening a door you didn't know was there, and finding something familiar behind it. When he left the room, I didn't move for nearly a minute. My fingers still held the stem of the wine glass, but I didn't trust myself to lift it. My knees were... I stayed up late that night, not out of guilt, not even confusion. It wasn't about romance. It wasn't about betrayal. It was about feeling seen, not as a spouse, not as a host, but as a person. And I knew, even if nothing happened again, something had already shifted. Not with him, with me. I thought the kiss would change everything. But when I walked into the kitchen the next morning, the world still spun the same. The clock above the sink still ticked in lazy rhythm. The window still looked out on our tired garden. And the man reading the newspaper at the table was still my husband. He looked up briefly and smiled. Not the kind that asks questions. The kind that believes everything is in place. I made coffee the way I always did. Beans ground fresh, water poured in a slow circle, steam rising like a quiet thought. My hands moved on autopilot, but something in my chest felt unsettled, like the air had grown heavier overnight. The sound of bare feet on the stairs made my spine straighten. He walked into the kitchen like he hadn't leaned in close to me beside the refrigerator 12 hours ago.
Nos lingerines glancent, nos hésitations.
He took a seat across from his father and reached for a croissant like any other young man returning home after a long time. But I noticed the small things. The way he brushed a crumb from his shirt and didn't look up after. The fact that he sat close enough to feel the warmth from my side of the table, but kept a polite distance. The deliberate calm in his posture, like someone balancing carefully. I carried on, because what else could I do? Later, when my husband left for a supply run, something about paint, maybe nails, I started cleaning the living room. I didn't need to. Everything was already in place. But I dusted the mantel, straightened photo frames, wiped down glass that hadn't seen a smudge. He found me crouched by the bookshelf, sorting things that didn't need sorting. "You always this restless when the house is full?" he asked from behind. I froze for a moment, then sat back on my heels. "I guess I like things in order. And are they?" I looked over my shoulder. He stood with a cup of water in hand, his eyes alert but quiet. "I'm not sure anymore," I said. That was the closest we came to acknowledging the truth. The rest of the afternoon moved like any other. He unpacked, settled into the guest room, took a long shower. I heard the water behind the hallway wall and disliked how aware I was of it. I folded laundry I hadn't worn in days just to keep my hands occupied. That evening, the three of us ate dinner together. Chicken, rice, something green. My husband talked about the price of timber and gas. His son listened politely, asked practical questions. I watched them both, two different versions of manhood, one softened by routine, the other held together by composure. After dinner, I moved into the kitchen to wash dishes. He joined me silently, drying each plate and passing it back like part of an unspoken rhythm.
À toi un point, Orfinger me again.
A quiet moment bloomed between us, but neither of us acknowledged it. "Are you planning to stay long?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the sink. He paused. "Long enough." I didn't press. When the dishes were done, he disappeared upstairs, and I stood alone in the stillness. My reflection in the window looked soft, almost faded, a woman outlined by habit, quietly stirred by memory. The next morning, I woke before the alarm, moved quietly, and showered. I chose a navy blouse with pearl buttons, slightly translucent, though still modest. Underneath it, a pale gray layer I hadn't worn in years, the kind that once made me feel lighter. It still fit. We crossed paths in the hallway. I was gathering laundry, he was heading to the kitchen. Our arms. He didn't stop walking, but I felt the flicker of something through that brief contact. In the kitchen, he made coffee this time. I watched from the doorway, pretending to examine the spice rack. He turned and handed me a cup. Our fingers touched again around the ceramic. "Thank you," I said. "You're welcome," he replied. A pause. "Still your favorite?" I looked at him, really looked. It is now. The rest of the morning felt almost too normal. My husband mowed the lawn. I vacuumed. The hum of appliances and chores filled the day like white noise. But every movement felt arranged around things we weren't saying. Every pause made space for thoughts that had no name. By evening, I was restless again. He was in the garage with his father, sorting old tools and boxes. I brought them water. My husband thanked me but didn't look up. His son did.
Horaise mais, juste à second Toulon.
Back inside, I opened the drawer where I kept things I hadn't touched in a while. I didn't take anything out. I just stood there, so many parts of me tucked away neatly, private, unseen, not lost, just waiting. That night, I stood at the bathroom mirror longer than usual, brushed my hair slower, watched my own fingers adjust the collar of my blouse, even though nothing was out of place. I didn't know what I was looking for. I slipped into bed beside my husband. He reached for my hand beneath the covers. I let him, but as his thumb ran over my knuckles, all I could think of was the way another hand had steadied me against cold metal, the way my lips had parted, not from affection, but from surprise, from recognition. I couldn't say it was a mistake, because part of me wasn't ready to stop it from happening again. When my husband suggested I go furniture shopping with his son, it sounded harmless, sensible even. "You've got the better eye," he said, "and he can help carry things. I'll finally take care of that." I passed behind him quietly, avoiding the creaky board near the hallway. In the bathroom, I closed the door and leaned against it.
My reflexion didn't look like a stranger anymore.
That was the part that shook me. I washed my face slowly, letting the water drip down before reaching for the towel. I avoided eye contact with myself as I patted dry, not ready to face the woman looking back, the one who had crossed the line again.
Not out of confusion,
but with intent. In the bedroom, my husband stirred briefly as I slipped under the covers. He turned toward me, murmured something about the grill. I answered just enough to soothe him. He rolled over, resumed his quiet breathing. I lay there, eyes wide open, the ceiling fan ticking overhead like a slow countdown. My body still remembered his kiss. My lips felt sensitized. Every part of me was aware in a way I hadn't felt in years.
I closed my eyes, searching for sleep.
But I saw his face, the way he looked at me before walking away. Not confused, not guilty.
Just, fully présent.
The next morning, I heard his voice in the kitchen, talking to my husband about fixing the backyard gate. His tone was casual, effortless. I stayed upstairs longer than I needed to, wondering how he shifted so easily back into the role expected of him. When I finally came down, they were laughing about something from the past. I smiled, like everything was the same. I poured coffee, took a seat, let the conversation wash over me. But under the surface, everything had changed, and I knew this wasn't finished. Not yet. The next few days passed in a strange rhythm. On the surface, everything looked ordinary, predictable, but underneath, something else stirred. A quiet pull that no one else could see. It was both thrilling and unnerving. I became aware of myself again, how fabric moved against my skin, how the air shifted when I passed by him in the hallway. The mornings were hardest. That's when the contrast. Making breakfast for my husband, the dishes, the weather updates, the small rituals. He wasn't cruel. He'd even grown more thoughtful lately. A hand on my waist, a kiss on my forehead when I wasn't expecting it. And that only made it harder, because he was trying, and I wasn't. That Tuesday, I wore a light beige skirt that traced the shape of my body in a subtle way, and a pale blue blouse with small buttons at the wrist. Underneath, a bra I hadn't worn in over a year, delicate, with thin black straps that crossed softly at the back. No one could see it, but it changed how I moved.
How I poured my coffee.
How I tilted my head when he walked in. He noticed. He always did. He didn't stare. That would have broken something delicate. He just let his gaze rest for a second too long before looking away, as if pretending nothing had happened. Later that day, while folding laundry in the guest room, his room, I found one of his shirts, still warm from the dryer. Without thinking, I pressed it gently to my cheek. It smelled like soap and something familiar. It made me pause, but I didn't keep it. I folded it and placed it neatly on the bed.
Style, my fingère tailled a little too long.
That evening, my husband suggested dinner out. A quiet little place we used to love, the kind with short wine glasses and music that hummed just below the conversation. "You've been quiet lately," he said as we sat across from each other in the booth.
Everything okay?
I smiled, adjusted my silverware, reached for water.
Just tired, Meb.
"This heat's been exhausting." He nodded, accepted it, and told a story about a co-worker's mistake at the office. I listened.
Il oget in the Reichtplatz.
But my mind drifted, not far, just home, just to who was. When we returned home, the lights in the living room were off, but the kitchen glowed softly. I found a plate on the counter with a note in his handwriting. Saved you one. Thought it'd be rude not to. My husband chuckled. Well trained. I nodded, eyes on the plate, but my thoughts were elsewhere entirely. That night when I changed for bed, I moved slowly, removing my blouse as though letting go of something I couldn't name. The undergarments stayed on longer than usual. I paused at the mirror, observing how the fabric framed me, not with intention, not for appearance, just for awareness. I wasn't preparing for anything. I wasn't waiting for anyone, but the way I folded my nightgown over the back of the chair and got into bed without it, that was a quiet choice. Not to draw attention, not to hint at anything, simply to reconnect with a part of myself, to feel present. The next morning, returned to routine. My husband kissed me goodbye, a brief, familiar gesture, and left for work, grocery list in hand. I stood in the kitchen alone, barefoot, watching droplets form on the orange juice pitcher. Then I heard a soft knock on the back door. He stood there, hair slightly damp, towel over one shoulder. I borrowed your hose, he said, holding up the sprayer. Hope that's okay. I nodded, of course, but he didn't leave right away. He leaned against the door frame for a moment, eyes steady. You seem different, he said.
Il tilted Mayed. Différent à où?
I'm not sure. Lighter, or maybe heavier.
It's hard to tell.
I didn't reply. A pause filled the space between us, still and quiet. I turned back to the counter, wiping away a spot that wasn't really there. When I turned around again, he was gone. That afternoon, I found a photo on my phone.
Taken through the screen of the back window.
Me standing at the sink, turned slightly, side profile visible. Light brushed along the line of. There was no message, no caption.
Just the photo.
I looked at it for a long while. At first, I felt a flicker of discomfort, the surprise of being noticed without knowing. But beneath that, something else stirred. I hadn't realized I could still appear that way, quiet, still present. That evening, the house felt hushed. My husband texted that he'd be late and would grab dinner on the way. I moved through the rooms without purpose, pausing at mirrors, doorways, windows, each one carrying a quiet weight. I didn't knock before entering the guest room. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped, elbows on his knees. When he looked up, there was no surprise in his face.
Juste silence, full and waiting.
I didn't speak. I didn't sit. I stood there, feet grounded on his rug, hands still at my sides, and the space between us felt heavy, unspoken, and real. Not with expectation, with permission, but I didn't move closer. Neither did he. We remained there, still. Two people standing on either side of something vast and irreversible.
We hadn't spoken a word.
But somehow, everything had already been said. I turned around first, walked out,
closed the door behind me.
But for the first time, I didn't feel like I was leaving anything behind. It felt more like I was drawing a boundary neither of us could step back across. And I wasn't sure I wanted to. The heat didn't ease. Even in the early hours, when the sky was just starting to brighten at the edges, the air felt heavy, pressing against the windows with a weight that lingered. I stood in the kitchen still. The soft hum of the refrigerator filled the background. I was barefoot on the cool tile, hands wrapped around a glass I hadn't yet taken a sip from.
The house was quiet.
My husband was away on a short work trip, a 2-day drive to meet a supplier a few